Welcome to the Catholic Parenting in Real Life podcast, where we share practical, real-life parenting tips to help you yell less and become the more calm, connected, confident Catholic parent that you want to be. I'm your host, Katherine Johnson. Let's get started.
Hello, my friends. It is Holy Week. And how is your Lent? How has it been? How is it ending? Over here, let's just say it's been a very Lenty Lent. A lot of life has been happening over here. We had a busted engine in one of our cars, a blown transmission in the other, and a whole lot of other life in between. So I'm grateful that Easter is coming. So last episode, we talked about letting go of mom guilt or dad guilt and forgiving yourself after making a mistake in parenting. We talked about how to reconcile your relationship with God through confession and with how to reconcile your relationship with yourself through forgiving yourself, growing in that practice of forgiveness towards yourself. And this week, I want to talk about what to do about your relationship with your kids after you make a mistake. One of the hardest things for me personally in parenting is seeing how my mistakes affect my kids. Anybody relate to that? Anybody else thought, oh my goodness, I am messing them up? The truth is that when we make a mistake, maybe we react in a way we aren't proud of, or we're overly harsh to the kids. It creates this certain kind of disconnection in our relationship with our kids, right? And we feel it and they feel it, and it doesn't feel good. What I've noticed about myself and many of my clients is that it can be easy to react to that disconnection, that uncomfortable feeling, by looking at the past and dwelling in shame and guilt, right? I'm a horrible parent, etc., etc., etc. Or we look to the future in fear. Oh, we think about how all the impacts that this is going to have on their future, right? So we look at the past or we look at the future instead of being present in the moment to the here and now and what we're called to do today. So what do we do about it now? Right? We mess up, we make a mistake, maybe we start feeling bad about it, maybe we start going to the fear place, but what can we do about it now? Well, I want to briefly mention, some of you listening, you might have adult children. You might have children that are out of the house. And, in some instances, mistakes that we make as parents, when our children are grown, that other person might not be open to an apology. In some major cases, it might cause a rift that leads to estrangement. And so what do we do in that case, right? What do we do when the other person, when our child does not want to hear an apology from us? Well, in that case, what we can do in the here and now is we can work on our own feelings in that moment. Maybe our feelings of grief over our inability to reconcile, maybe over those feelings of guilt and shame and processing those with our Lord. But that's really kind of what we can do in the here and now if our child is not open to an apology from us. But what I want to assume in this episode is that your child is still under your roof, or your child is willing to receive an apology from you and to continue that active relationship with you. So what do we do? What do we do after we make that mistake? The answer is we apologize. I know it's probably what you didn't want to hear, but what you knew was coming. We make a true apology, and I'll talk about what a true apology is. But a true apology, really at its heart, it's an opportunity to grow in virtue because it requires a lot of honesty, integrity, and humility. At least that's what I have learned in my own parenting. With apologizing, I used to think, I don't know if anyone can relate to this, but I used to think, apologizing just looks weak to my kids. Right? It felt like I was maybe losing my authority as a parent, or I was groveling at my kids' feet, blaming myself for everything that happened. But I have really worked on that mindset and that view and just learned a lot over the last few years. And I've chosen to really see it as a way that apologizing to my kids can be a way that I lead through example to my kids of what it looks like to own up to your mistakes in a way that is full of integrity and honor. I want my children, when they're adults, to know how to own their mistakes and not in a way that's self-deprecating. And I want them to be able to apologize to people they've offended, but not as a means of, maybe sucking up to them or groveling, right? But just as this honest action of owning their mistakes with integrity and honor. And as I say this, Some of you, when you were children, might have many examples of one or both of your parents apologizing to you. Or maybe your parents, as you've grown up into an adult, have come to you and apologized. But others of you might never have experienced an apology from a parent, or it might have been a rarity. And so it might feel harder to hear this. It might feel harder to access this in your own parenting, to know how to do this in your own parenting. So just to be aware of that as I'm speaking and talking. But no matter where you are, I hope and pray and trust that you will get something out of the next few minutes. I first want to walk you through 3 points around apology, and that is what an apology is and is not, a little bit of research behind apology and repair in parenting with our kids, and finally to talk about some reasons why we as parents might hold back an apology. And then after I cover that, I'm going to give you some practical ways to apologize and repair with your kids, and give you some examples from my life of what that sounds like. The first thing we're going to talk about is what an apology is and is not. The way I like to define an apology is this: a regretful acknowledgement of a wrongdoing. An apology is a regretful acknowledgement of a wrongdoing. All an apology is just acknowledging that you made a mistake, whether it was intentional or unintentional. It's just acknowledging that you made a mistake and expressing some regret over that, a regretful acknowledgement of a wrongdoing. So that's what an apology is. An apology is about virtue, right? I mentioned earlier, it requires a lot of humility to apologize. It requires a lot of honesty and integrity and honor as well. An apology is also not dependent on forgiveness. And what I mean by that is we can apologize and the other person is not required to forgive us. Our job is to acknowledge our mistake, and then we kind of throw the ball into the other person's court to do with it what they will. They get to choose if they choose to forgive or choose not to forgive. And it's not our job to make them forgive us, because forgiveness is really more about them than it is about us. Apology is also not groveling. I mentioned it's also not self-deprecation. It's not false humility. It's not over-apologizing, right? A true apology is not, I'm such a horrible person. I did all this stuff. Why do you even like me? I'm not fit to be your mother. That's not an apology, right? An apology is also not, I just do everything wrong all the time. I'm so sorry you have to live with this. Apology is also maybe not sarcasm of, oh yeah, it's all my fault. I'm sorry. Those are all not true apologies. But when we embrace what an apology truly is, I just think it's really beautiful. It's like when we go to confession, we go to the priest and we regretfully acknowledge our wrongdoing. It's very similar. Now I want to dive into a little bit of research behind apology and repair in parenting. So I talked last episode about, we are imperfect. We are imperfect. We make mistakes. And God knows that you're going to make mistakes. And he knows that you're going to make mistakes in parenting. He knows that. But we as parents often find it so hard to come face to face with those mistakes and the way that they impact our kids. So I really loved something I read in the book, The Power of Showing Up by Dan Siegel, because I used to think, I make these mistakes and I'm imperfect. And how can I expect my kids to have a good childhood if they have this imperfect human of a mother raising them? So then when I read The Power of Showing Up by Dr. Dan Siegel, it really showed me the beauty of how God designed our brains, our relationships, and how he kind of factored into that the fact that we're going to make mistakes. So in the book, The Power of Showing Up by Dr. Dan Siegel, I'm just going to kind of summarize and paraphrase what he says. But essentially what I took from it was the mistakes that we make in parenting don't have to create big problems. They become bigger problems if they go unresolved. And what I mean by that is if there's no closure to them. So if there's some rift in our relationship with our kids, we make a mistake, there's that disconnection, and then we just don't talk about it, or we don't say we're sorry, or nothing happens, and that doesn't, there's no opportunity to resolve that between us and our child. There's no closure to that. And that's when these mistakes can become more difficult for our children in their hearts and minds, because there's no resolution. I think back in my own life, or I welcome you to think back in yours, but when I think back in my own life, the hurts that I hold on to the most are the ones that someone didn't apologize for. They're the ones that I didn't get to talk through with another person. They're the ones that didn't have closure. I can think back on instances of my life where there was maybe a significant mistake that happened, whether it be with friends or with family or with my children or with my parents or with my spouse. And those moments of hurt where I was able to talk to the other person about it, and I was able to apologize, or they were able to apologize, and we were able to reconcile through that apology and that forgiveness. Those I don't hold on to as much, right? I very rarely hold on to those. It's the ones that feel unresolved that are much more tender. I love that what he said in his book is that repair is so key. And that's a fancy term you might hear in the parenting world for just apologizing to your kids and for essentially reestablishing that connection with them, repairing the connection that was broken when something happened between you and them. And in Dr. Dan Siegel's book, he talked about how that resolution after the mistake is so powerful and can help us maintain that relationship with our kids in such a way where it won't, quote unquote, mess them up like we're all afraid to do. And the last thing I want to talk about is some reasons why we might hold back an apology. And I'm just going to speak from my own life experience and from my experience with my clients here. The first is forgiving our kids. Sometimes we hold back an apology because we have not forgiven our kids. We focus on their faults. We focus on their mistakes. We focus on what they did and how it caused us to do the other thing, right? If you hadn't been fighting with your brother, then I wouldn't have had to do X, Y, Z. If we go back to scripture, we focus on the splinter in their eye and ignore the beam in our own. And that can keep us from wanting to apologize. What might also hold us back from an apology is thinking it's too late. That ship has sailed. That happened years ago, or that was last week, or that was even yesterday, right? And I don't want to dig up ancient history, all those things. But the truth is that it's never too late to repair. My sweet, humble mother has this beautiful tradition, I will say, where on New Year's every year, she comes to me and just says, honey, I just want to apologize for anything that I might have done that has offended you and hurt you in the last year or even before that. I would just want to clear the air, and I want to ask for your forgiveness for any way that I might have hurt you. And she's also approached me as an adult and apologized to me for things that she remembers from my childhood that were weighing heavy on her heart. And those moments have only brought us closer in our relationship. So it's never too late to repair. We might also struggle to apologize or want to hold back an apology because maybe we think, well, I apologize and then I make the same darn mistake over and over again. What message does that send to my kids? Well, here's what I want to say to that. What is the alternative? Is the alternative that we just don't apologize to our kids and then we continue making those mistakes? Because that doesn't sound like a great alternative. The way I have seen it and the way I communicate it to my kids is I am human. I struggle with some things over and over, and I'm going to keep working on them. And I will tell my kids that I am sorry. I'm sorry I made this mistake. I know I made it again. I'm working on doing better. I am an imperfect human, and I am asking God to help me be a better mommy for you. Another reason why we might hold back an apology. I don't want my kids to think that what they did was okay. Does that sound familiar? If I apologize, they're going to think that their behavior was okay. An apology is not saying anything about the other person's behavior. It is simply owning up to your behavior. And the last point that I'm going to cover that might hold you back from an apology is thinking, well, what if they don't forgive me? And here's a beautiful phrase that I have learned to use in my apologies to my children. Please forgive me when you're ready. I feel like somehow as a child, I learned that the way to apologize is, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? And I have been working hard as a parent to shift that to, I'm sorry, please forgive me when you're ready. Because then that gives that person the ability to sit and reflect and do what they need to do to forgive, to release that anger that they have towards me. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go to the last episode and listen to it. That's in their court. Forgiveness is in their court. My job is to apologize. Whether or not they forgive me, that doesn't negate or make the apology any better or worse. My job is to apologize, and their job is to decide if and when they want to forgive. So now we're going to get into some practical steps on how to do this. Maybe there's a small unintentional mistake that we make that doesn't really affect our kids, like maybe we spilled some water on the floor. And that doesn't require any big apology, right? We can just say, oops, and then move on. Maybe there are some small unintentional mistakes that do affect our kids. How do we apologize from those things, right? They're just accidents. Here's an example of what I say in those situations. Let's pretend that, I'm doing the dishes and my little toddler comes over to me and I back up and I don't know she's there and I trip over her and knock her down, right? And then she's crying. Here's what I would say. Ouch, that hurts. That was an accident. Mommy didn't see you there. I am so sorry. I'll try to pay better attention next time. That's it. Pretty simple. Acknowledging that she's hurting, saying it was an accident, not putting a ton of blame on myself, explaining to her that it was an accident, that I did wasn't intentional, and that I'm sorry, and that what I'm going to try to do better next time. So then what do we do with those bigger mistakes that feel much more yuck? Well, here is kind of a formula that I use. First, acknowledge what happened. So look to the past, what happened. Then acknowledge how that affected your child. Then say, I'm sorry. Tell them what you are going to do moving forward and ask them, please forgive me when you're ready. With bigger mistakes, I think it's important, at least I've noticed in my own parenting, that it's important to kind of empathize a little bit more with our children, to understand their perspective, to take a little bit more time in our reflection. So for example, let's say I yelled at my daughter. Here's how that apology would sound. Honey, I know that I yelled at you. I was feeling really impatient about getting out the door and I yelled at you. And I can imagine that probably made you feel pretty frustrated and maybe a little scared to be yelled at by me. And I'm really sorry for doing that. Next time I'm going to do my best to try to start getting us out the door a little early so I don't feel as stressed. And if I'm feeling stressed, to take a breath and take a minute before I open my mouth to talk to you. Will you please forgive me when you're ready? Right? So it's pretty simple. Past, what happened? Present, how is that affecting the other person? And I'm sorry, and what will you do moving forward? Here's a perfect example if you want a very real life example of the fruits of this in my own family. My 8-year-old, on her own, will apologize to me after a bad moment without prodding. Maybe she loses her cool and says something sassy to me, and she has to cool down first. But after she has cooled down, more times than not, she will come to me afterwards, after she makes that mistake, and she will offer me a heartfelt apology. Not because I ask her to, not because I guilt her into it, but because she has seen it done and it's been modeled to her. My kids aren't perfect, but it's moments like that I know that this is bearing fruit, that I know that all the hard work and all the humility that goes into these apologies is worth it. So to wrap up, I'm going to give you some homework. Very simply, I want you to try apologizing to your kids. Maybe just one kid. It can be about something big, something small, something that just happened, something that happened a long time ago that's still weighing heavy on you. But I want you to try doing that if you're open to it. And if you feel some resistance there, and if you're not open to it, I invite you to just ask yourself this question. What is standing in the way of me apologizing? And if you're feeling really stuck, reach out to me. I would love to coach you through it. I offer calls as short as 20 minutes and as long as an hour. So anything to fit your needs. All right, my friends, tune back in next time for an episode on praying as a busy parent. And until then, I'll be praying for you.
Thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, please leave a review and share it with a friend. And remember, you are a good parent. Jesus sees you, loves you, and is right beside you in every high and low moment. And you don't have to navigate this parenting thing alone. Reach out to me anytime at Catherine@cjjcoaching.com. See you next time.